Joining us now, Raffi Williams of the Republican National Committee. Raffi, we always appreciate your time, and thanks for being with us again here on America's Forum.
Thanks for having me on. I love coming on.
I got to tell you, as we look at your hopeful visage via Skype, it's almost like that line in the movie where things look good. They look so good that something must go wrong. I mean, I'm not trying to sow those seeds, but having been through my share of elections, when you get these kind of numbers this early, well, I'll just leave it to you. What's your take on the optimism about these numbers here on what is a primary day in 3 states?
Well, I think that these numbers are great for us as Republicans. I think they show a lot of what we've been talking about over this past year or so, where the Obama administration, the Dems, have nothing to run on. They have failed time and time again when it comes to Obamacare, the economy, and foreign policy, and the American people are reflecting that in these polls. But I think that as Republicans, we need to make sure that we don't rest on our laurels and that we take advantage of these numbers, keep going out there, working hard, talking to voters, telling them our message, spreading what we stand for. Because right now they're saying we stand for the Republicans on the economy and on Obamacare. And so these are things we need to keep on pushing because it's never good enough.
Well, Raffi, the Washington Post, you know, it's interesting. Pre-election polling and statistical models kind of remind me about what statisticians now do with baseball. At any rate, the Post has come up with an election model that says Republicans have an 82% chance of winning back the Senate. Now, the old joke when I was in the House and we'd have special elections, the Washington Post, we would joke saying, look, our goal is to make sure the results of this election stay way back on page 827. The idea being if a Democrat won a special election, boom, it would be front and center on the first page. So I'm not trying to denigrate the Post, but again, it's a case where as they try to handicap these races, 82% chance of winning back the Senate. Your thoughts on the world's most exclusive club and the possibilities for Republicans to return to majority status there?
Look, I think we have wind at our back going into the Senate here. I think that's very important for us. I think it's going to be very good coming November. But I think you have to look at this and say, look, even the liberal mainstream media cannot spend these numbers. They cannot say, oh, Republicans are losing here, because we aren't. I mean, you look in 2010 when we had that landslide election, the Tea Party wave there, and they had the generic ballot at equal between Republicans and Democrats. Now we're looking at it and it says Republicans are up by 5 points over Democrats across the board in the generic ballot. I mean, this is groundbreaking stuff for us, and this is going to be really helpful come November, and it's going to be helpful to build momentum going into 2016, which is, of course, very important as well.
Now, obviously, Raffi, in your role at the Republican National Committee, it is to focus on Republicans. And as we know, as is being demonstrated today in 3 of our states, Indiana, Ohio, and North Carolina, there are primaries, Republican on Republican races, if you will. And there is some concern, Raffi, and certainly you've heard it and seen it, that the establishment versus the grassroots Republicans, often in shorthand it's called the Tea Party, that this fight can be so divisive in its own right that it's difficult to rally the party base come November. What will be the challenges for the Republican National Committee moving beyond the primary season, preparing for the important midterm elections once these primaries are decided?
Look, I think from an RNC standpoint here with the primaries, well, you know, we stay out of the primaries. We let the voters decide who they think should be their best representative, and then we get behind them and we push them and help as much as we can. And we just encourage everybody else out there, from volunteers to voters to who you name it, to go out there and support the Republican ticket, to support the Republicans on the ballot that your friends, your neighbors, your townsmen, that they've gone and voted for and said, this should be the person who represents the Republican Party in the general election come November. And so we're going to be doing everything we can to unite people, whether it's through our field operation or our data engagement. I mean, these are things that we're doing to make sure that the Republican Party is a big team that's working together and pushing ahead so that we can get wins in November. Because at the end of the day, we need to win in November. We need to get back to Senate, and we need to protect the House, and we need Republicans who are going to help us do that.
Raffi, the old joke about political science, in addition to being the world's most obvious oxymoron, is that electioneering is a fairly simple proposition, at least intellectually speaking. You identify your voters and get them in greater numbers to the polls than your opponent does. And you've mentioned some of the technological outreach. Let me turn to your role demographically as a spokesman to younger Americans. We know that typically in midterm elections, the turnout is down. America, I guess it was Joe Califano back in the late 60s, early 70s, wrote a book entitled, quote, A Presidential Nation. So many people look at the presidency. There is so much news coverage on what transpires at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue that from time to time the legislative branch kind of gets lost in all that coverage and all that concentration on the executive. But what case would you make to people, the millennials, younger voters, first-time voters, about getting involved in the upcoming midterm?
Look, there was a recent poll done by Harvard Institute of Politics that came out last week. And in this poll, it shows that millennials are being increasingly disaffected about their government. They don't like it. And I think that this has a lot to do with Obama over-promising and under-delivering. And they're saying, you know what, we just can't trust our government, which is a scary thing. And I would go and talk to young people, and I do talk to young people, and I tell them, look, Obama has misled us. He's leading us down a bad path. We're on the wrong direction as a country. And that direction, at the end of the day, that's going to fall on us. What's going to happen to us with Social Security, what's going on with Obamacare, it is impacting young people. And we need to go out there and vote so that we can put the country back on the right track, so we can get the Senate back and force Obama to really make some tough decisions on his desk about where he actually wants to create jobs. Look at the Keystone Pipeline. Look at the hundreds of bills that are on Harry Reid's desk right now that they refuse to bring up, yet continue to try to bash Republicans. We need to have a Senate that's going to force Obama to either say, I stand with the American people in creating jobs, and I stand with the American people having a better healthcare system that isn't Obamacare, or saying, I don't like Americans, or I'm not going to support Americans, workers and citizens. And that's really the option that we're facing here in 2014, and it's something we have to hit home. And so what we're doing here at the RNC is we actually started a program called Campus Captains, which identifies conservatives on campus and helps organize them to do door knocking, voter registration drives, having a conversation with other students on campus so that they get a better sense of what's going on and young people are in the know so they can be educated voters come November.
And your official title is you're the Deputy Press Secretary for Youth and Conservative Media. What about social media? Because the talk is, from a historical perspective, it looked like Republicans 30 years ago had a corner on the market with direct mail. But since then, and especially in this age of Obama, the Democrats have been dominating the tools of the internet. We got a couple of minutes left. Can you detail what you have been doing in terms of social media to bring the Republican effort up on the internet?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the first thing to note, though, is that there's no better voter contact, than human-to-human interaction. There really isn't. But social media does play a very important role in what we're doing. And if you looked, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, an article in the Washington Post came out and delineated how Republicans are actually doing better on Twitter. There are more of them on Twitter. There are more users. They have more followers to a greater extent than the Democrats are. And from the RNC, we have our whole new lab called Parabellum Labs, which is doing digital marketing. And so we have infographics coming out every day, easily shareable content that people can engage with. We're just finding new ways to get people involved with the Republican Party and involved about thinking about their politics in a different light and a conservative light. And that's something we've actually put a lot of money and time behind. We're also redoing the way we look at data. So we are finding out better ways to translate data across platforms so the person doing direct mail is using the same data as a guy walking doors, and so that we don't send, envelopes to people who don't need it. We don't knock on doors where people don't live, and we're talking to the right people. So we're taking this is a big comprehensive effort that we've been working on since last year. It's coming to fruition like we saw in Florida 13, where we were able to use dynamic scoring to figure out what voters to get out for David Jolly, and it worked for a great reason. And so hopefully this will work well in November too. We're pretty confident.
Raffi Williams, we appreciate your perspective from the Republican National Committee and your demographic perspective, being one of the younger voters. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Always appreciate it.
Now, Raffi pointed out something important. You can have all the social media in the world, but ultimately it's each one reaching one, that human interaction that's so important. Stay with us. When we come back, another attack rocks a railroad station in China. Plus, that huge wildfire in central Oklahoma continues to burn. keeping about 1,000 people out of their homes. Those stories and more coming up on America's Forum.